Hi, it is October 2nd. Happy fall.
Thank you. I can't believe it's October.
Here at LaMontagne Gallery in South End, Boston, Massachusetts. Todd Pavlisko. Screaming Through Space is the show. Please come see it. It's spectacular. And I have known Todd for
2008, I think, for the first.
So it's probably about 13 years,
Yeah.
right? And I've seen the work over that time. And so I'm interested. There's a lot of different things happening, right? A lot of different things happening in the world right now. And your practice seems to respond to those things in a contemporary way, you know, with the sort of conceptual underpinning of the work, but also in a super traditional way with the ways that you make art. Sure. So can you talk about that sort of connection between the two things, between the contemporary and the traditional?
Sure. I mean, just in regards to the execution of the work, you know, I've always been really attracted to making things, you know, learning. As a kid, just delving deep into how to make a drawing. Mm-hmm. It starts with, oh man, this pencil doesn't work. People say, like, you make a drawing with charcoal. I don't know about you, but when I do that, it's an absolute disaster.
Well, I'm a neat freak, so I can't.
So am I, especially with the work.
Yeah.
So you really kind of like funnel through all the tools of the trade first before you can actually get to something that works for you in regards to making a drawing or making a sculpture, whatever it is. I started doing that really young. I used to get little album covers, you know, and just draw them. And didn't know anything about art. I just wanted to make this thing look like that thing. Right. You know, and you start over, you keep going, and then you learn, like, well, I don't have to do album covers. I can do portraits. I can just move through imagery. Mm-hmm. And those were really amazing training tools for me to kind of understand it.
But it sounds like the appropriative impulse was there in the beginning. That you would see things and sort of not even translate them, but try to make them as close to the original as possible.
Sure.
So that was like from the beginning.
I suppose that's what I understood what art was.
Right.
Like I had no idea. It's just like if I could do that, then I made art.
Right.
You know, which we now know it's like, no, you didn't.
Well, tell that to the people at home.
I mean, because back to your question, it's like, because then you start to embed a lot of concept in the work, and that's harder than the drawing itself.
Right.
You know, is to make a meaningful piece of art actually have weight in the end, something that you're proud to hang, want to talk about, connect to contemporary culture, things that are happening. That's an incredibly difficult task to do.
But you know, I think that with your work, Todd, there's so many opportunities for misunderstanding with the viewer. Sure. And is that something that is built into the work that you know is going to happen?
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah.
I would think so.
Because I think, you know, the picture that's behind you of Dr. King, which is, you know, such an exquisite work, right? And I think about a tremendous sense of sadness and grief when I look at that image. I think that it took me a little while to get there because the work unfolded so slowly. Because at first, you know, the skill level to make the image, it's based on the photograph, so am I looking at the photograph, what am I looking at? And then understanding that this is a crafted experience, that it's not I don't even know how to say it, it's kind of an appropriated experience, but it's also a crafted experience.
Sure, I without question, I wanted the work to be haunting. Right. It does its job when it is. I mean, obviously his history isn't haunting, what happened to him is. Right. So there's a bifurcation there of what artists should and are allowed to talk about. Mm-hmm. And regarding this image, it also, the stoicness of a portrait really is a commanding place for a viewer, because in many respects you're eye to eye with the subject matter. Exactly. You know, and I really wanted to force that. With this particular piece, there's piercings in the face, and I hope that's not lost on my audience, is that is incredibly important.
But see, that's the thing, like it's the moments that I make those discoveries in looking at your work, where I think I'm looking at one thing and then I realize, no, I'm looking at something else. And then there's like this, like, oh my God, this sort of almost horror at what I'm seeing, right? And it's not because of the subject matter, it's because of the execution, right? And all the sorts of things that you do, your attention to framing, the encapsulation, the amount of black space, all of that stuff is completely considered.
For sure.
Yeah. So it's the sort of neat freak in you going to the nth degree.
I'm so glad you tapped into that. I mean, this particular piece has the silver with the molded light and the tektite gems also, which I think we share this in our work, very tight. You want it to be clean, you want it to be very controlled. Those moments allow the work to get dirty, marred, and manipulated. So when you do look at it, you start to see the swaying of the chains. Continue the drawing, take away that sort of prettiness, and sort of influence the piece a bit.
But it's also like a self-contained system, right? And like when we talk about systems, when we talk about a lot of the work that you do, the system of NASA, the system of the civil rights movement, the system of the NBA, the system of the military, what is it about those kinds of systems that you want to intervene in? Even with the museum work, with the piece with the marksman in the museum, like intervening in the system of the museum.
Sure. The piece I did regarding the sniper in the museum was a very challenging work. I was just talking to my buddy David about that. Just the bureaucracy, the journey of bureaucracy to get that to happen. That was at the Cincinnati Art Museum. Kudos to the Cincinnati Art Museum and the team that I was working with there. They were very forward-thinking people. They didn't balk at it out of the onset. They were very calm about it and entered into the conversation. And between you and I was taken back by that.
Yeah, you weren't expecting that.
I honestly, at the onset, the curator, her name is Jessica Flores.
Yeah.
She has since left the museum to get her PhD, but she was just so amazing. She just saw it and understood what I was trying and wanted to do.
Right.
Now, having said that, given I wasn't in Boston at the time, I was incredibly attracted and deeply involved in researching Dr. Harold Edgerton's work.
Right.
So you start to see the bullet and the apple, the bullet going through the card, and for me that was just really beautiful work.
Right.
And you work your way back on that, and you start to get through the intricacies of it. Still needed a bullet and a gun.
Right.
And that was a place for me to get, for my work to be very. I wanted it to be challenging. I wanted it to be a difficult work. I expected it to be. I would underscore also, just by happenstance, that's my hometown.
Oh, wow.
So, and I didn't know those people, but I had been to that museum my whole life.
Right.
I knew that hall that I was going to shoot in intimately. I could close my eyes, and I knew the museum probably better than most people who work there.
Right. Right, the artist's relationship with the collection.
Yeah. I mean, and it's a nice segue even to this exhibition. When you get to other works in here, there are a lot of bullets flying around.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I wanted to talk about. Like, when people look at artists like, oh, Todd Pavlisko does a bunch of different things, right? And I think, no, like there's a sort of through line in all the work. The Chris Burton with the performance where he gets shot, the attempted assassination of President Reagan, the murder of Dr. King. There's bullets throughout this, and the sort of idea of something screaming through space or shooting through space is deeply tied up in this.
Absolutely.
I wonder about your relationship to the people in the work, because there's something akin to reverence in everything that you do, and there's a lot of misunderstanding of that kind of reverence. Like it's not minstrelsy, it's not blackface, it's not appropriation, it's actual literal hero worship.
Very much so, and deep research and being attracted to learning.
But I mean, but the other thing is like this is your life. Like you have a very keen experience of American racism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I always kind of later, as a white person,
yeah,
you jump into this world and you're working with images of people of color. You know, it's like, who owns these things? How do you work with them? Becomes a very challenging position to take. And I sort of realized that I'm not taking a position.
Right.
These are my experiences. You know, when just to brief audience, I mean, I grew up in a very small town outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. Very racist neighbors. It was very normal to see Klansmen, Nazi skinheads. That was a very normal thing for me growing up. To be clear, also flanked by very knowledgeable, very smart people who, you know, clearly worked against those ideas. But I saw the Klan in hooded dress regularly growing up.
Right.
Regularly.
But see, this is the thing. You saw that and you responded with a sense of horror. Like, it didn't. Those weren't your people.
Oh, right.
And but see, this is the thing I always try to get people to understand, that white people who are ostensibly white, actually have an investment in that work, right? That to look at the Klan and feel threatened by the Klan isn't an exclusively black thing. Because you had this experience and your family had the experience being incredibly threatened by those people.
For sure.
Right? They're not your allies, they're not your friends. So of course it stands to reason that this is the direction that you would move.
It's important to say also, there is no learning about. We get Martin Luther King Day off in grade school. You don't know shit about Dr. Martin Luther King, but the journey that he has taken, the language, the writings, all that stuff are never a part of that.
Right.
And that to be clear, didn't come till many years later when you're, you can go find these things, read these things. They're incredibly difficult stuff.
Well, so most people don't realize he was hated. It was like someone shot him in the head. You know, and so like the other work where people, like, how do we lionize our heroes? How do we talk about their importance in popular culture? You know, the work that starts to develop that comes out of this, like, what do we want from Martin Luther King? We want to be pacified. We want to use him as a cudgel against other black people. Like Martin Luther King wouldn't do that, right?
But you also look at yourself and you look at the people in the community around you that look like you, and you don't want that behavior to be supported. Again, in Cincinnati, it was a yearly occurrence where the Klan would do a march downtown Cincinnati in Fountain Square, everybody hooded up. Mm-hmm. And that was around the time where you would still hear people say, like, well, they have the right to think that way. Right. And this is what freedom is. People have differences of opinions. You're like, what? You know, it's like that. Like it's. Thank God we're not in that momentum.
Well, difference of opinion is like whether or not you like Hall & Oates. That's like a difference of opinion, right? You know what I mean? I love Hall & Oates, right? And I'll go to the mat for them, right? But like, I'm not having a difference of opinion about humanity, right? Yeah. And there seems to me, Todd, this deep desire to connect with our shared humanity in the work through appropriation and through like these sort of direct connections that you have. When I was 15, it all kind of came to head for me when I started to realize, cause I was really into art, probably like a lot of us. You don't know anything about it, but you know that you're interested in it. You start to look at art books. Cincinnati Art Museum's a major force. So you're going to all these places. The long story short, in my high school, just by happenstance, Halloween dress-up day, in, I don't know, 1990 probably, 89 or 90, several kids wore their parents' Klan outfits to Halloween dress-up day, which shut the school down. Like, what few kids of color that were there, like major fights, all this stuff, school canceled for a couple weeks. And the kids got expelled, which the Klan and a bunch of neo-Nazi skinheads sued and did a big march in town. And I'll never forget that moment. You know, it's like they actually started from the high school and walked up College Street, which is the worst thing they could possibly have done, because
bunch of people like myself and pretty liberal-minded college kids in like fraternity houses and off-campus housing, hurling rocks and sticks and logs. So by the very dangerous moment, because some of like a sort of piercing moment for me, it still stays with me, is like the Klan's women holding their Klan babies dressed as Klan, like inside of this bloody mess. Like, you know, so that was like a very powerful awakening for me to realize like that even just the performance of that theater is viable art language and very much usable. Doesn't matter what color you are. It's ripe for consideration in the creative world, for sure.
You know, it's such a formative moment. Like you just kind of,
A little side note, I got busted smoking weed then, so I was in trouble with the law. My parents were like, do not go to that. And I was like, yeah, no problem. I was running cross country at the time.
Right.
And so I told her I ran right up to the rally.
Of course.
You know, and like everything. I mean, you get caught up in that. You know, so I was throwing whatever was there, just throwing stuff. Fast forward the next day, I get a call in the morning. It's like, dude, have you seen the paper? And it's like full color photo of me like hurling a rock. It was, you know, to this moment, like, okay, that's worth it, but not so much back then. It caused a lot of problems.
Yeah, mother would be so proud, you know.
But I mean, just that emotion, if you can channel that emotion now into working with, you know, images that, you know, you're surrounded by as a young kid, a mid-career artist moving on into my life. You know,
right.
It always was there with me.
But that passion, to me, when I look at the work, the passion comes out in the facture of it, but also in the way that it's organized within its frame, within the installation, within the group. You sort of move through time as you're moving through the show.
And everything is very much tied to each other. Right? You know, that's one thing when I was working with the gallery. I was like, I want to do an installation piece, but not traditional Todd Pavlisko where you come in with a bunch of shit and you like want to go crazy, you want to do something real. I wanted to be very subdued and let the imagery that I provide to kind of get.
But you know, you're working with iconic images,
for sure.
Right? And so we start to get this sense of, and this is me talking out of my own experience, right? So it's almost a very preparation to enter a sacred space or religious space, like the small devotional objects when you come through the corridor. You know, the large group portrait like the Last Supper or Supper at Emmaus or something like that.
Sure.
Individual martyrs.
Sure.
And then like this sort of idea of Dolly Parton ending the show, this sort of moment of hope or sort of apotheosis.
Or constant like a nebula or something sitting on the black drawing. You know,
the final frontier.
Yeah, you know, it just like the show title, Screaming Through Space, is a lyric in a Fish song.
I will forgive you for that.
And I will in the next year be taking you to a Fish show.
Okay.
But anyway, there's a really beautiful moment in the song called Soul Planet, you know, where it's such a positive song. You know, it's just such a really wonderful experience. And I just saw him not too long ago. I was actually in the middle of that show thinking about this. I was like, I remember calling Gene, I was like, I got the show title. You know, like God figured it out because I knew the work would be very difficult.
Right.
So there's always like this overarching sort of like place of peace, a place of togetherness amongst the things that, you know, you have to siphon through, that you have to kind of really get through the difficult parts. You know, again, like even just the image of the assassination attempt on Reagan. I wanted it to be some more of a inverted rainbow, and I wanted the jelly beans to be a prominent part of that because, I mean, if you knew anything about Reagan, there's always like this, oh well, anybody comes to my office, you can have some jelly beans, it's a sweet moment, but nobody had access. Right. Well, I shouldn't say nobody, very, very specific kind of person had access to those jelly beans. So this is why here they're laced in glass, you know, so if you were to chew them, you're gonna essentially be a part of those policies. You know?
Right. But you know, like the jelly beans on the desk, people with AIDS dying. You know, there's absolute silence about that.
Right.
jelly beans on the desk around Contra. Like those kinds of things that are happening at the same time.
And the weight of the rainbow for trickle down, so it's all coming down, but the weight is ugly.
Right. And I think that with Burden about the uplift, the sort of apotheosis, the idea of hope or something. In the, the Bill Walton, which I still struggle with because of Bill Walton's relationship to me as a Black person and seeing him in like the fullness of who he is and what he can do. Like the basketball as a site for race relations has always been incredibly fraught, especially living here in Boston, all that sort of stuff. And so thinking about the NBA as it, in our lifetime, how it transitioned from a mostly white organization to almost an exclusively Black one.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And that moment with like kids your age having posters of Black people on their wall as their heroes, right? From Magic Johnson to Michael Jackson to Prince, like you have these young suburban white kids with huge images, lurid, almost eroticized images of Black people. Think about Prince on that motorcycle, with the smoke and like, oh my God, like, yeah, exactly, and like that kind of thing, like that had to be like deeply influential to you in that moment.
Well, not only that, but the music. I love music so much. I mean, I have so many musical influences, not that clearly in this show.
Yeah.
But throughout my
But what I'm getting at is this idea of the hero.
Oh yeah.
Right. Like, and like when we talk about who gets to have what heroes, like when you think about who you're going to incorporate in your work, like who makes their way into your work. I think about the baseball card project where you have like a baseball card, you're getting people to sign, people who aren't the players to sign these baseball cards.
Sure.
This way of like talking about like exchange in this weird kind of way.
Yeah.
And like, I would sign this card, but I wouldn't sign that card, right?
Sure.
So this idea of like, how am I connected to your heroes?
Anybody who signs that body of work is like deeply impactful to me.
Right.
So it's like those are the people that you just true appreciation of these people. So that's where it starts. And then I mean there's a value system, there's an economic system of those cards.
Right, because they have value on a collector's market. Clearly.
Right. So it's like take for example a buddy of mine were to sign a card, that card is incredibly expensive.
Mm-hmm.
To me, now that just because my buddy has now signed that in the industry and in that world, it deflates the value.
Right.
But for me, it only increases.
It increases the value, right?
And the rarity of that moment is a real celebration. But regarding your question about the characters, it's who gets chosen. It's like that's for me, my making. Like for example, the Martin Luther King drawing kind of came out of bike riding through Harlem. Seeing the churches, not even in my own ignorance, just being with the buddy saying, hey, that's where he did this talk.
Right, being in the actual landscape where he was.
For sure. And then you're like, man, that's like we were talking a little bit about the architecture, beautiful frames. You want it to be like housed, in a very appropriate space because in my mind I'm seeing these really seminal locations that people like me were never there.
Right.
But in some tight shorts on a bike, you're there, but then you get back and then you actually do some real research. You're like, fuck, man, there's so much to get through, so much to now learn, and that's when I start to delve into them becoming characters in my work.
I always say to my students, like the era of the stupid artist is over. Like I really do believe that, and like the amount of research that goes into your work.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So like that, I'm always afraid of people missing the point. Like, and I think that the Chris Burden and the Dr. King image sort of give the game away about the intensity and the depth of the practice, right? is it hard to make a one-off thing for you? Like, do you always have to make like a related body of work?
It's an interesting question.
Yeah.
There's oftentimes a larger body of work that might not make the exhibition, but it's part of that learning process. I'll go as far as, for example, I did for many years, was working with the image of Richard Pryor.
Right. That was some of the first work of yours I saw.
I went deep into that work, going as far as reaching out to the photographers who took those photographs of Pryor, those people who eventually became friends of mine, and then you get to see the real photographs.
Right.
The stuff that no one ever got to see. You're like, damn, man, that's a real lived experience, that doesn't exist in libraries. It's not out there. That information isn't available.
Mm-hmm.
But it is if you care.
Right.
It is
if you care to learn about someone other than yourself.
And go deep into it, and then there's a real celebration in executing that work.
Right. I remember seeing that work and thinking, like, I didn't understand it. Like, I really honestly did not understand what I was looking at. And it took me like maybe 20 minutes with one of the drawings. First of all, to realize that that's a drawing, it's not a photo. Like, that was the first thing. And then once I got that information, I thought, who would spend this much time with this face?
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's the thing that people don't understand about portraiture or about drawing people. Like, you're spending a lot of time with their face. And it's not easy to do this.
Yeah, I think you totally tapped into it. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's like, man, they're staring right back at you.
Yeah.
You have a responsibility to the drawing.
And what happened to them.
Oh, yeah.
Like, because of all the research, the limits of their life. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like, that's very hard. And that's my wheelhouse, was portraiture for a long, long time. But when I think about, I don't know if I could ever go to the place that is required to go to image Martin Luther King as something other than Santa Claus. Because that's the way we respond to him now, right? And the thing about this, and the Chris Burden, which is such a haunted image, the requirements of portraiture to go beyond likeness to that other thing, like that other sort of unnameable thing mm-hmm. that you see in a great portrait painting.
Right. For me, I'll always, I don't ever make something and not further it, if that's a way I can explain it. I always see more potential surrounding elements, other attributes that could be applied to the piece. I never saw, there's something a little stale for me to just draw a portrait.
Right.
There's so much more potential, so much more fun, so much more art that could be made once you do execute it, once it's framed. And I knew out of the gate I wasn't gonna mess around with his face, Bird's face. I knew I'd play with the science around him and what
right.
We talked a little bit last night about my associations with these people. It's like he is one of those people, like, throughout my life, had several interactions with, and just the coolest guy, a really available person to me. Mm-hmm. I can only speak for myself. It just was like always there. Very aware. There's something about that I knew I needed to make something after he passed away.
Right.
He was out at Brandeis in the commission that the Rose Museum bought.
Right.
He passed away several months. It just
right.
Wow.
It was a shock.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nobody knew. And just. But there's a freedom in that too, because then you start to get back into the work. Now what is made,
right.
And we have a responsibility to go back into the meanings of that work, and then you dip into the world like this guy's like really a scientific tweaker,
right?
And I love it. I think it's wonderful, and his idea of like the weightlessness of the steamroller and all, like the meanings and the ideas that can be embedded into a piece like that is just so fresh for me.
But it also, like, the Burton's work is very difficult, and it requires something more of the viewer than just what Duchamp would call a retinal experience. It requires so much more than that. And I feel like your work does something similar, but it really does privilege observation, right? So there's this way in which you have the sort of satisfaction of seeing the work realized. Like as the viewer, I'm like, oh my God, that's an amazing thing, right? The other part of it, like the meaning, sort of, it's almost like, you know, when they say like you put a frog in water and you turn on the fire and it like sort of, it comes to a boil before you even realize what is happening, right? And that's always been like a hallmark of your work. Even the things that were supposed to be like kind of funny weren't funny at all to me.
Right.
Yeah. The bongs that were like, I didn't find that funny at all. I thought it was kind of tragic.
Yeah.
Like trying that hard to get high and seeing like all those things surrounding Richard Pryor in the way that he was lost, right? There's a way in which the misunderstandings in your work tell me something about the people who misunderstand them. Yeah.
Interesting.
And I kind of don't like the people who don't get your work. I have to say, because the thing that they're laughing at, I don't think is funny. And that's the difference. And we were talking to Russell last night about like you being an ostensibly white person, and I just need to say for the record that I don't think of you as white. I think of you as Todd. I think whiteness is something people do, not something people are,
sure.
Right? And so to talk about that kind of thing, like what I see is what you see when you look at Martin Luther King, because you see all of him. You see him in his fullness. And so we can have a conversation about Martin Luther King and talk about like the CIA and like his enlarged heart and the pressure he was under and the sort of emotional affairs he had with women and all this other sort of stuff. We can talk about the real man.
Yeah.
And not like this, like, you know...
nail on the head right there. I mean, unfortunately it's not in this exhibition, but the body of work I produced, which went on view February of 2020, again, oddly enough, in Cincinnati at a little museum there called the Westin, was a bunch of Pez dispensers donned with pretty forceful major characters. And I was thinking at that time about, not only does my daughter like the Pez dispensers that I play with her, but I started looking at those pieces very differently about the people that were on,
right.
who gets chosen for that. And then I started to think about myself and the world we live in made me think, especially for a lot of white people, even in their genuineness, to get through something, get lost in the character, opposed to the actual real person.
Right.
And so I thought, what better way to make these gigantic, major, forceful characters very playful, you know, but very perfect, you know, so they are...
Well, they're made of mahogany. They're
African mahogany.
Beautifully crafted. Giant Pez dispenser, Frederick Douglass,
yeah.
You know, which is, on the one hand, you're like, oh, that's hilarious, or that's mean, or whatever. It's like, no, think about what people want. Yeah. Donald Trump used Frederick Douglass in his campaign. Yeah. Like, the notion that these people are of use to white people when they meet them. We pull out Martin Luther King. Martin wouldn't protest that way. We pull him out when we need to like shut something down. We pull out this sort of caricature of him, right? We pull out the Maya Angelou, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. We always pull that out, and we never pull out the fact that she was a sex worker. Like, we never pull that stuff out because we can't see the fullness of the person.
Well, even again about Martin Luther King, I was shocked. Even like as much as I started reading throughout the years, I was shocked to learn like this guy was dipping deeply into the idea of space travel.
Right.
And who gets to do that in his 60s? You know, and that's again why you see someone like Mae Jemison. It's like, and finally, I mean, there were men who made, African American men who made it up there before she did, but when you get to her, there's something really poignant about that moment.
Right.
You know, and it's like, it all comes from this place of like, that's like, you see a lot of white people in that National Geographic, anti-National Geographic poster, where it's like, we now know, like, the office was full of people of color. You know, it's just actually who got there was a lot of folks.
Right.
They might not have been on the plane, but they're in the
But
air.
it's that idea that the scaffolding of American life is black people. Like that there's people who are not, it's not that they're invisible. Because you walk by them every day at work. You know, Buzz Aldrin dealing with the women, Catherine, God forgive me for forgetting her name. But, you know, who's doing the calculations, you know? Like understanding that his life is in the hands of that black woman, you know? He knew it. So why are we pretending like everybody else doesn't know it? You know?
John Glenn's a Ohio guy too, you know, so it's like, that's another place for me. Like I grew up in Ohio.
So did I.
Yeah, of course, right. Mm-hmm. And it's like you take your own roots and the things that are around you when you're young, mm-hmm. and then you realize you really don't know much at all, and you have to kind of relearn everything along the way.
Right.
Especially now in the context of contemporary culture, like rightfully so. It's like let's reread a lot of things.
Well, let's make those things available to each other. Like, you know, I don't know what life would be like if I were uncurious about other people, you know, and the idea that somehow Bill Walton is inaccessible to me because of his ostensible whiteness has always seemed completely insane to me. It's always seemed completely insane, right? And so the notion that all these people in this work are accessible to you, that they all live and they function within one consciousness, which is yours, mm-hmm. and they each bring different things to the practice.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up loving Bill Walton, you know,
right.
so I see him on so many different plateaus, but I also grew up with Dolly Parton.
Right.
I have in a way, not nearly as dramatic as her upbringing, but, you know, poor white kid in Ohio, mm-hmm. you know, playing, you know, cigar box guitars and stuff. She legit records with stuff like that as a momentum and an honor to her own upbringing.
But also think about like the persona, right? Dolly's fun, Dolly's entertaining, Dolly blah blah blah. Dolly wrote Down from Dover.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Dolly wrote If She Never Said So to Daddy.
Yeah.
Like she wrote these songs that were really about the deepest kind of heartbreak that people experience, right? And you know, she wrote "I Will Always Love You," like which became like a sort of anthemic,
that's right,
like moment, you know, in American culture. And so, like I said, again, Todd, it goes back to seeing her in the fullness of who she is and what she's a multi-instrumentalist. Like she's this.
She's 30 instruments.
She's an incredibly brilliant artist, right? And to see her in her fullness is something that I think the contemporary moment tries to flatten everything. You know, Murakami talks about this super flat culture and stuff like that. And that's why I always despair when I see, like I like taking photographs of the artwork and putting them on Instagram and like letting people know what's going on. I don't like putting your work on Instagram. Because I always feel
first of all, I'm terrible at social media. I don't really care too much about it either. I don't find it to be an important mechanism to put my art out there.
Right.
I appreciate when it does happen.
But I'm always terrified it's going to be completely misunderstood.
It inevitably would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like I have yet to even, you know, post this show because we just are working through the images. We're now talking about them. So I'm starting to now maybe find a place to put some of this language out, but maybe it's not important.
It is important, Tom, because I think that, I said this to you last night, people go to football games, and there's all sorts of rules and stuff that are explained to them about how to behave. People will people will say, well, I'm a Hufflepuff, or I'm a Griffin, or whatever the fuck. Like, I never read this fucking books. I'm a grown-up, and I've actually had sex. I don't care. I don't give a fuck about that stuff, right? But people will organize their lives around these systems, right? And somehow I'm supposed to participate in this nonsense, right? And so people will learn Klingon. Like somebody sat down and figured out a fictional language.
Sure.
Right, so like, don't tell me that people can't commit to some other kind of vision.
That's right.
They can, they just won't.
Right.
And so there's this thing about the didactics on the wall, the artist statements, the writing about the work. Like, if you're going to participate in culture, like, you might have to do a little bit of work.
Yeah.
Just like you have to do a little bit of work to figure out a Chinese food menu. Like, you have to do a little something.
Yeah, and maybe because we're so insular and we're surrounded by people who enjoy that kind of work, but that's, once you take a step outside of that platform, that's where
Honey,
it just falls off the cliff.
If people cared, they would do it. That's the thing. So many people think that this doesn't have anything to do with them. It's like Meryl Streep and The Devil Wears Prada. Oh, you think this doesn't have anything to do with you?
Yeah.
Like, you don't understand that you're looking at a Lil Nas X video and you're like vibing on that and thinking it's amazing, and you don't understand that all that shit comes from Jacoby Satterwhite.
Yeah.
Everything he has done has, like, Ray of Fine Desire, Jacoby Satterwhite, Whitney Biennial, look it up, right? And so, like, the notion of the avant-garde isn't gone. What's gone is a level of interest.
And the curiosity.
Right.
You know, I think, like, museums, museum curators, and that system are doing an amazing job. That's hard work.
It is.
You know, and it's like, it's started a long time ago, but man, we're starting to realize, like, that is a long, long journey. You know, where it's not an educated, it has educational roots, but there's something that the viewer arrives with inherently first. I
think the viewer arrives, period. And then that's when our work begins.
I go to a museum, maybe a couple times you see the same show, you're thinking about something, and then you just sit down and no longer looking at the art, looking at the people. It's amazing how quick people are in and out of this.
Yes.
It's flabbergasting.
Right.
It's just like, and some of the images that are actually on the wall are so challenging and so important in their intensity.
Right.
That I don't know if it's the art they don't want to think about. I don't know what that is, but I'm fascinated by watching those.
You know, Todd, you can tell somebody that Drake is a great rapper, right? Maybe he is, maybe he's not. If you've ever listened to Eric B. and Rakim, right? So you can't tell me that people can't discern, like, of course you can. It just comes from a sense of exposure. Like, and there are things that have come to us through museums that have simply survived. And yes, the museum is a neo-colonial project. Yes, it's driven by capitalism, blah-de, fucking blah, right? You know what I mean? Yes, all that stuff is true. And we have museums, and museums are important, right? And so if you don't like it, maybe you could get a job at a fucking museum and change it, instead of sitting on your ass and complaining about it. It's very easy to complain about the museums, right? It's very easy to be like, oh, you have to have justice, right? When the truth of the matter is that, you know, there's people who can't vote.
That's right.
And that's a harder fight than getting a museum to quote unquote decolonize, right? So I have nothing for them. The museum has an educational function, but people have to come to the museum wanting to learn.
Absolutely.
That's
we
the
talked
thing.
about that.
Instead of wanting to be affirmed, I don't need to be affirmed.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need to look at I don't need to see images of black people in the world to know that black people are human. Like, I don't need that information.
Yeah.
And I lament that people feel like they need that information.
Right.
I don't need you to make work about ostensibly white people in order for me to step into it. Martin Luther King is your lane. Like, you get to claim him just like I get to claim Eric Assad.
That's right.
Right?
And Reagan.
Right. So, like, all that stuff is in your lane. And so the challenge becomes for galleries, for artists, for museums to actually contextualize the work for people. And we've all done our job. Yeah. The problem is that people come to the museum and they have this notion that it's about them being entertained, or it's about a distraction, a pleasant distraction on an afternoon.
That's right.
You know, when you look at Impressionist paintings, which are about the horror of mechanization, right, at the core of them. But they're pleasant, you know?
I mean, we dipped into this a little bit last night when I was teaching at the Andy Warhol Museum. A 7-floor museum, the 6th and 7th floor, the special exhibition floors, where the first 4 floors are beautiful, big, very expensive works of art, very entertaining by the time you get to the portraits, you know. But at I did 2 exhibitions while at the Warhol. The first one was Adrian Piper. And
that's rough.
As one of the educators in the education department, incredibly challenging. Perfectly situated for the show that was coming, which was Without Sanctuary. You know, so it's like we're not entertained anymore. We're not. Right. We're like this is the hard work, right? Yeah. You know. And that hard work stays within you. Those shows stayed with me.
Yeah.
Those experiences stayed with me. Those visuals stayed with me. I have a responsibility to that experience.
Well, I think that you're in the conversation where you're making images that do the same thing. That actually trouble how we understand the appropriated images that we've seen, and they stay with you. I can't think of Dr. King any other way. Every time I see that portrait now, I think of it that way.
Yeah.
I love you.
I love you. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad you took the time to talk to me about the show.
Pleasure's all mine.
It's really fantastic.
Very meaningful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.